everyone, this is Chris, and you're listening to One Cross Radio, and today I'm joined by a almost lifelong friend. Like, I've known him for about 15 or so years, worked with him, and just great guy. He married me and my wife Jill, Pastor Dave Lombardo. Dave, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing really, really good, Chris. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you, man. And if you, the listener, could see Dave's majestic beard, you would just be almost in awe.
Yes, well, you're lucky. At the time of the recording, it's only going to be on my face for another week or so. So, Chris, you are one of the lucky ones that get to see it.
I'm glad I get to see it, because I know we're actually hanging out in a couple weeks, and by then it'll be gone. And
yeah,
if I hadn't seen it in its full glory, beyond Will Riker TNG glory, I would be devastated walking in and being like, where'd it go? like a toddler who's only seen their father with a beard, I'd be like, wait, who's this guy?
I'm just going to say that because I'm guarantee you my kids are going to freak out when I come home without it. So yeah, Chris and I were talking earlier, and so we're doing like this youth group fundraiser thing, and there's a couple of kids who have a bounty on my beard, and so basically they're trying to get whatever, $1,000 or $1,500, and if they get all that in one shot on one day, then they're going to shave it right there on the spot. So that's happening March 4th. So anyways. Man,
well we'll be praying for that, and then you can maybe start showing the kids pictures of you from a teen when you didn't have a beard, just being like,
right, I can do that.
Get used to this. Get used to this.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so Dave, I've had the benefit of knowing you for years and knowing your journey. When I met you, I think we met at TDI, the Thursday nights youth group out of the Salvation Army Church.
Yeah, that's true. That's a long time ago, man.
And then we bonded over a love of metal and Metallica, and then now in Solidian.
Yeah.
And then I was giving away spoilers. Can you share with us a bit about your life story and your testimony?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in a Christian home. My parents were both raised Roman Catholic, and kind of departed from that in the middle of their teen years. And so when they were, dating and getting ready to be married and all that kind of stuff, they got exposed to a Christian evangelical church, an Italian evangelical church, was Pentecostal nature, and they invited them out to an event, and my parents heard the gospel, and after eventually they finally trusted God. And so that happened before they had kids, and so we were born, and like church is a huge part of our life. My dad was always on the board or doing something. My mom ran a bunch of programs, and so we were like there multiple times a week. We were like hardcore Pentecostal Sundays, and so we'd have really long Sunday morning services, and then we would run home for a power nap, and then back to the church for really long evening services.
Oh wow!
And so just there a lot. And as I think back on my childhood, like, some of my best memories are in that church building. It was this amazing, 150-year-old church building out near High Park in Toronto. And just really good friends there, people who deeply cared about me, and I cared about them, knew their families. It was a really good time. And so our tradition was that, we were always asked on a regular basis, do you want to accept Jesus into your heart? And I was asked that, with whatever frequency, once a month or something, whoever came up in the kids' curriculum. And I remember thinking, whenever I was asked, even at a young age, yeah, I definitely want him in there. I didn't realize he came back out. I thought, he would stick around for a while. And so that was kind of my experience. But when I was 12, 13-ish, many other kids in our youth group were getting baptized at that time, and I could say, yeah, for sure, no, I believe Jesus is the Son of God. I believe He forgave me of my sins, as much as I could actually understand the way to that at the time. So I was baptized, and so got heavily involved. Had an amazing youth pastor. Was involved in serving. Started playing a little bit of music and stuff like that. And then when I was 15, it hit the fan in a big way. And so our church went through a whole bunch of political difficulty. There was a bit of a split that took place in the church. A number of families left, including our own. And that really, really jaded me for quite a while. And so I don't think I ever lost faith in God. I always believed He was real. It was more like I just didn't want anything to do with Him or anybody else that had anything to do with Him. And so, again, that's 14, 15 years old, and going on behind the scenes and all that, I started taking a medication to take care of some acne problem that I had, and with that, which had side effects of extreme sensitivity to the sunlight, and depression were like side effects that an acne medication gave you. So it's not like as if I had no idea about that. I didn't want anybody to see me because I was ashamed of how I looked. I went on these pills that were helping my skin clear up, but were making me totally miserable. So it was around that time, Chris, that we met. That's when I started getting into heavy metal, which I probably would have gone to heavy metal even if I didn't get depressed, because I just love it. But that was kind of what was happening at that stage in life. So I was always kind of in and around churches for a while. Like, so there was this ball hockey thing where we met the Salvation Army. The other guys in my band at the time in high school were connected to that church, and then we continued to be connected through Calvary Church, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I was around once in a while on Sundays and got involved with the day camp there. But even through a lot of that, like, it was more just like something to do where I had friends and I was still really not certain about my faith. And I was really two-sided because I would spend Thursdays and Fridays, Saturdays playing clubs with our band in some dingy places, and doing all sorts of things. And then, Sunday I'd be in church playing drums because they let me do that. And I figured, well, at least I can kind of have the best of both worlds. And so I was kind of doing this two-faced thing until I was 18 or almost 19, and I'm at a Morbid Angel concert and down at the Opera House in Toronto, and the opening act was a band named Behemoth, and he went on like this anti-gospel, anti-Christian rant. There's like 1,000 people or something, more maybe 2,000 people in the concert venue, and he goes on this anti-Christian rant, like, who are the Christians? He's German, so the way he spoke was kind of broken English. Who are the Christians? We've got to find them, we've got to destroy them, we must hate them, like eradicate them from the planet, all that kind of stuff. And I remember standing in there and like being like, you can't talk about me like that. You can't talk about my people like that. And in that moment, I'm not like super charismatic or anything like that, but I remember having a very distinct moment where it was as if God was speaking to me, not audibly, but just saying something that nobody else could have in a voice that I'd never heard before, an inner voice I'd never heard before, where I was basically being asked, like, okay, what are you doing with your life? And I had two words pop into my head that I still resonate and think about to this day. It was music or Messiah, and it was almost like I was being given this choice, like, what are you going to pursue? Are you going to pursue this heavy metal lifestyle, this band, which was a lot of fun, but a lot very destructive, or Messiah, Jesus? And I remember distinctly because Messiah is not always a word that gets used. We usually talk about Jesus Christ and not necessarily Jesus Messiah, the one who was promised, the one who was chosen from eternity past to be the one who'd come and save the world from their sins. And so that messed me up for like a while. I eventually quit the band, and that was hard because those were like childhood friends in that band. But quit that band, and the band fell apart after that, actually. So that was kind of like, whatever had happened. And then around there, I got plugged in. Again, it was still at Calvary Church, but to a guy named Gary Coburn, who was running a youth center called Pape Youth Center.
Gary
Bear. And he took me out for coffee and lunch, and like was the first time I was able to ask real hard questions about faith that I'd never felt safe asking before. Like part of the Italian culture, this stereotypical, but also part of the church life that I grew up in was very much, you don't express your concerns. If you have a doubt, you don't raise it. You just keep that quiet. You got to put your best foot forward all the time. You got to look like you got it figured out. And so Gary was one of the first people I met where I could totally just be who I was and swear a little bit and get angry a little bit and say, I don't know how I feel about this whole, whatever my issue was with the Bible at that time as I was learning it. And so then in there I met Sandra, who's my married eventually. She's been like this rock solid, faithful woman of God since she was a little kid. And she would be the kid who, when she was 5, accepted Jesus. And then when she was asked again, do you want to accept Jesus in your heart? She would say, no, I don't need to. He's already there. So very different expression of her faith even at a young age. And she whipped me into shape, man. She took her faith so seriously. And that was totally instrumental. So between her and Gary, totally instrumental in getting me back on track with God. And so I do believe I was saved at a young age when I professed faith. But I don't think I experienced the reality of the weight and the goodness and the beauty of the gospel and its power in my daily life until I was about 20, which is 10 years ago. And so at that point, at 20 years old, things started to happen fast in terms of how God transformed me. I had been kicked out of school because I failed my way out of York University, because I couldn't read a book, I couldn't write a paper, and within a year I was locking myself in the room, reading books on theology, writing sermons, and just doing everything I could to reflect and to learn and gobble it all up. Total transformation, renewal, and regeneration of my mind. absolutely happening there, and got plugged into ministry. So served at the youth center for a while, side by side with you, Chris. And
I remember.
I was in the crew. Some of the best Friday nights of my life were spent in that youth center together, ministering to some hard, challenging kids. And then from there, we felt God's call to move us into a different kind of ministry. I didn't think I would be doing kind of like outreach stuff for forever, and so ended up getting plugged in at a church called People's Church in Toronto, which blew my mind because that's a big church. They have 4,000 people or something on the weekend, and the youth group at that church was the size of Calvary, massive. And no idea what I was doing.
It's almost like a mega church, right? In terms of its size and. Yeah,
for sure. Depending on who you ask, some people say a mega church is anything bigger than 1,000 people. And so, in Canada, though, one of the bigger churches in Canada for sure. And so that was not even on my radar, even though I knew they were looking for a youth pastor. But God clearly moved and did some amazing things. And I had 5.5 years of amazing ministry there, where I grew significantly and was able to, by God's grace, have some good impact on the ministry, build it up there. And love doing that. Got to preach a whole bunch and got to be with some of the best youth volunteers in Canada that I've ever met, or anywhere really. Really the most, so just, I almost want to say addicted to grace, just so in love with Jesus and so motivated by, even though their brokenness, motivated by the fact that God is good. And so, so that was life there. And then in the last 2 years, started a sense of burden. Okay, it's something else is popping up. You're not going to do youth ministry forever. And I really gained a passion for church planting. And it started with, that passion started in the wrong place. It started actually as a passion to want to prove everybody else wrong and basically say, well, you dummies don't know how to do any of this, so let me go do it. Give me all the money, give me all the power, and we'll go fix it. It's totally like armchair pastor, or when we watch the news and see our politicians disappointing us, and we say, well, if I was in charge for a day, if you were in charge for a day, if I was in charge for a day, or if you were in charge for a day, Chris, and took Justin Trudeau's job, the whole country would be on fire.
Oh, no, that's not even offensive to me. I'm I'm not that guy.
All of us. So that was the attitude I had, though, and God broke me down because I wrote up a big proposal saying, here's an idea I have for planting a church out of People's as the sending church, and I got rejected. And I took it very, very personally, and it really offended me and hurt me deeply inside. But God used that God used that to change me, to mold me, and to change my perspective and say, you can't do anything without me anyways, and if you're going to try and do it without me, I don't want any part of it. It was like God was saying. And so it totally humbled me, was able to reconcile and be on really great terms with our senior pastor and others at the church. And so when I came to start talking about feeling that God was calling us to move on, they were so supportive and liberating and freed me to go and explore this, and got connected to a church where I'm at now called Upper Room Community Church. And so we're in Vaughan, and basically when we live up in York region, where Sandra and I and our kids live, and so Vaughan is a part of York region, and we had felt, we love where we are. We're starting to understand what the culture is like in York region, as big as it is and as varied as it is from place to place. And so Upper Room Community Church has a vision to reach York region, to reach Vaughan and beyond. And so there's so much in line there. And so right now we're in the outside of a 10-year vision to see 5 congregations reaching 3,000 people in the places we live. And so really what we're saying is, how can we multiply our church? How can we multiply our ministries? How can we be involved in reaching as many people as we possibly can? And started here in October as teaching and site pastor. And so I alternate preaching responsibilities with our lead pastor every other week, so which is like an amazing gift to have. To be 30 years old and be a primary communicator in a church is just such a huge gift from God. And to be able to do that and grow in that area, continue to grow in that area. And then I oversee a congregation in the town of Bolton. So our church in Vaughan has partnered with a church in Bolton for a year, and I'm responsible for overseeing the ministry that happens up there. So that's kind of like a both and. That's kind of like a testimony and call to ministry, and then where I've ended up, which is kind of how my life has been. That turning point at 21 years old when I abandoned the idea of being a rock star. and got kicked out of school and didn't have a chance at becoming a teacher anymore. That was kind of the trajectory I was on. It was from there where I couldn't actually see anything other than doing some form of ministry. And so, yeah, just God's faithfulness in all of it and keeping me close to Him. And yeah, I think if I wasn't in ministry, I wouldn't be a Christian. And I mean that seriously, because, you know, when you have to prepare yourself to preach or to counsel other people or to train people in evangelism, or as Ephesians 4 says, you know, equip the saints for the work of the ministry.
Yeah.
If it wasn't my responsibility to be doing those things and to be going before God on my knees like all the time saying, God, help me with this now, I don't think I would even like have a need for Him. So there's a way that I think He keeps me accountable and shows me His faithfulness by keeping me tightly knit to work that He's got set out for me to do. So so anyways.
And like I've had I've got two side thoughts. One is like that thing you just said there about if you weren't in ministry, how you might not be a Christian. Like I said something similar at a Mishfam a couple weeks ago, where I'm just like, it was so much easier to be on top of going into the Word daily and like being diligent in prayer and relying when it is part of your job, because there is a huge difference when it's on your effort and on God's effort. And I'm like, and now that that's not there, that's areas that I used to, praise the Lord, through Him flourished in. Like right now, those are the struggles, and I'm just like, so that resonates. So I'm glad you shared that. And then also just, I remember seeing some of those turning points, because like I've said, I've had the benefit to know you, and I consider you a brother, and you're a great friend. And seeing those turning points, like I didn't even know some of the stuff, because you kept it like close to the chest. So thank you for your openness, and I'm thrilled to see how God's evolved you and changed you and know even more now. So, bro, thank you.
Yeah, it's been a fun journey that we've all been on together, man. With our crew of guys, it's been amazing to see how God's been working there and continuing to knit us together. So it's pretty good. Yeah.
All right. So I think you've talked about some of it a little bit, but what actually, you did answer this question. So you have been a pastor in a couple different churches, some moderate size like Calvary, People's, which is comparable to a mega church, and then even with its Canada's celebrity pastor of Charles Price. Sorry, my phone's messing up. And then now you're in a church that's without a building. You guys meet in a theater. So what have some of the differences in that been, and how have you seen the Lord at work in those three very different setups?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the things about a portable church or about a mobile church is that there seems to be a sense of everybody's got to be in doing something. Everyone plays a role in all of this. And so with Upper Room, like our church was planted in Vaughan 12 years ago. Calvary Church, I think, was probably around 80 or 90 years old. I don't know.
I think their 90th is on Mother's Day this year.
That's amazing.
I know.
People's Church is coming up on 90 years as well. And so not only with People's and Calvary do you have church buildings, but you also have established, like, huge history, huge heritage, and so with a newer church being only 12 years old and not having a building, the dynamics of those two things are that, well, in the new building, without having a building, everybody's kind of all in. We haven't been around long enough to have people who have become set in their ways, although I'm sure there are people who are set in their ways, not nearly as much as people who've been around in a church for 50, 60 years at another place where there's a particular culture or tradition or, unspoken realities, unspoken rituals that nobody tells you about until you screw up and don't mention it or whatever. So that's one of the major differences I noticed. Now, don't get me wrong, at Calvary there were beautiful, servant-hearted people. People's, obviously, I mean, out of the 4,000 attendees, I think that there's something like 1,500 people on the volunteer roster, so it's a tremendous amount of people who are serving in various capacities, But there's just a different dynamic when you're, a smaller church and you're without a building. You have to be more nimble.
Mm-hmm.
You can't assume that anything's going to be done for you. And so I even remember at People's, we had an incredible custodial staff there that you submitted your drawings for your meetings, and when you got to the room, it was set up, tables, chairs, coffee, fruits, whatever you needed. It was all there ready to go. And I actually eventually ended up canceling those services because we'd have people show up and not have to do any work. And so by not putting chairs out, it automatically created an opportunity for youth volunteers or teenagers or whoever to start setting up and serving. You come to a church plant, well, a newer church without a building,
mm-hmm.
not a church plant anymore. We're very established now, 12 years in. And that still exists in that, you've got to be creating opportunities for people to be serving all the time. But because you don't have a building, it's obvious that there's work to be done.
Yeah.
You walk into a room, and if nobody set anything up, you're going to sit on the floor. So in Bolton, we're in a community center. It's just a big, open, multi-purpose room. In the movie theater, at least there are seats, but the amount of work that goes in for a couple of hours before service starts, there's lots of work to do there. So those are some of like the it's kind of maybe surfacey. Beyond that, there's just varied differences in terms of the culture that our church is trying to establish at Upper Room. And I don't mean to be comparative. I love churches in general, and I think part of the power that churches have in their witness and influence on communities is their differences. I think the unity that we have in one Jesus, like in one Lord,
mm-hmm.
But is represented in a variety of ways. I think that's actually part of our effect. A friend of mine says there is one church isn't for everybody, but there is a church for everybody.
Nice.
And so part of the culture that we're trying to establish here is like very much come as you are. Our preaching style is very much we're approaching or trying to speak to people who are de-churched, grew up going to church. We have a lot of people who walked away from the Catholic Church that come to our church and stuff. So just kind of meeting that, and we're not really trying to set an agenda or a direction other than saying, hey, we want to just be authentically pointing one another towards Jesus. We have a deep faith, and it's rooted in Jesus, and we have a wide embrace, meaning like whatever your walk of life is, you're welcome here, and we are going to do all that we can to point you in the direction of following after our Lord. So, I appreciate being in this size church we're in right now and in this situation because you don't know what's going to happen every week. Like last week at the movie theater, all of the speakers on the right side didn't work because Cineplex had blown a fuse or I don't know what happened. Something happened, and so we only had power coming out of the left side. Now, that doesn't happen it could happen anywhere, but because we're at the mercy of a movie theater, we had to roll with it. And so all the sound for the band, for the preaching, everything came out of one side of the speaker, and so like that's, if you're in another church where you have your building and you've got a crew that's going to go and fix all that, but we couldn't actually do that. That was on them. Not to mention just everything else that has to go up and down every week. So we literally keep our church in a box and then unload that box. So, size obviously has an impact on it as well. At a church the size of People's Church, with 60 people on staff and that many volunteers, organizationally it's just monstrous. It's so big and handled so much differently. Mm-hmm. Here we're 6 staff, and we have quite a crew of volunteers, but 6 of us, we can all sit around a table and have a staff meeting. We can talk through various elements of ministry. At People's Church, given its size, the staff members were more specialists in that. I'm not really a youth specialist, but I was specializing or focusing on youth ministry and young adults, where here you kind of do a bunch of different things. So my main responsibility is teaching and multiplication strategies, but we do a little bit of everything. Everybody does a little bit of everything. Yeah. And so until you get to a size where you can start recruiting and growing your staff, those are some of the main things that pop into my head anyways about the differences.
Yeah. And thank you for that, man. That's interesting stuff. And sorry, I started chuckling when you said that the right speaker wasn't working. I'm just like, in my head, I'm like, did it sound like when one of your headphones isn't working and you're listening to the Beatles and all you get on Yellow Submarine is the vocals and the guitar in one, but you're missing the drums and the bass?
So what they ended up doing is they ended up cranking it to compensate, and then it actually led to a feedback, but it was the best we could do if anybody was going to hear. So those are one of the things. The age of our church, you don't have people scowling and looking around because we're young and fluid, and we know that there was a time when we had no mics anyways. Yeah. People can remember back to that. Wow. Whereas church like People's or Calvary, which are like established so long, nobody can think back to the to the roots or the very beginning. Some people can, but more often than not, we don't remember our humble beginnings.
Yeah.
You're now so established. Here, you've got people that were part of the planting team, and they know. So when it happens, it's like, yeah, this is normal for us. This is not.
Yeah, it's more about it can be, and I'm not slamming Calvary in any way, but in that situation, it's more of a, all right, we can laugh and roll with it because we remember. Whereas, I was not on the sound team, but I was on the PowerPoint team, and it's like when something went wrong, you had at least 3 people looking back, being like, "What's up?"
Yeah,
when you're fixing this. So,
yeah. And I played drums at Calvary, man, so I got as many scowls as you could possibly imagine.
You got one. I'm not.
Yeah,
let's not. We're not trying to slam anybody.
I love those people. Really do genuinely love Calvary Church. Foundational and the opportunities they gave me in ministry.
Yeah. And I hear you. And as much it's still my home church. Like, as much as I love the new church and the St. Clair and what they're about, what we're doing, I'm still like, I love Calvary. I love going back to it, and it's the opportunities they gave me through ministry, through the food bank, and then Gary as well for me. I'm just like, man, the Lord used Calvary so much, and it's
Absolutely.
90 years, wonderful, praise God. Sorry. How do you? Skipped ahead. Church plan. Dang it, man! I'm just skipping all the questions.
I might not be helping you. I think I'm bouncing around a lot. So.
It's all good. I love the bouncing, though. Here we are. What are some of the ways that Upper Room is involved in the community in Vaughan?
So, so could you, actually, I meant to ask you this earlier, if you could expand on the question a little bit, meaning in terms of, how we're serving the immediate community, or what do you mean by that?
Essentially that, actually. How are you guys serving the community? Is there... Yeah, that's basically the question. You asked it better than I did.
Yeah, so, when I first read this question, one of the things I thought of immediately was, what sort of social service projects are we a part of? Are we connected to a food bank, or are we connected to whatever, a shelter or anything like that? And it kind of brought me down this rabbit trail of thoughts, which is that sometimes I think when we think about, reaching our community, we can automatically go to social justice issues, which are really important, good things. Like, people need to be fed; they deserve to be fed. Need to have a warm place, especially in our climate, and all these other kinds of things. And so, when it goes to those kinds of things, we're involved with, we've got a Syrian refugee family, and we've been involved in that in a variety of ways. But given the kind of the demographics of our city, we have been more situated where part of what we do is more we're reaching families through gospel initiatives. So, for example, doing a marriage course where we invite all sorts of people from all sorts of backgrounds to be a part of a marriage course, and while they are taking this course, typically in their homes or wherever else, not just necessarily bringing them all into the church to do something, but meeting them in whether it be a pub or a school or something, doing the courses there, we get to expose them to the version of marriage that marriage in its truest sense, the truest version of marriage. Or we do that through Alpha. And so what happens through Alpha is we invite our friends and our family members who don't know Jesus, who are from all different walks of life, and as they come and they share and they get to ask questions about faith, we find out, you have such and such a need, you need a ride here and there, you need financial help, that can go through our benevolent or our compassion fund. And so we kind of discern and figure it out that way. And so we also, as a church, we're part of the Christian and Missionary Alliance, so global ministry is very significant to us, and so we support ministers, missionaries serving in different parts of the world as well. Beyond that, we're also involved in some ending human trafficking initiatives, and so Vaughan is not unlike Toronto in that there's if even one person is being trafficked, that's way too many. So we're involved we provide our space, where we use our space to let various human trafficking groups come and meet here, but then we're also a part of somewhere we're creating kits which are given to women who have been rescued or who are leaving the sex trade, and that's a complicated thing, but we're involved in that, and we're beginning to see traction there, primarily just in having an increased number of people who are paying attention and functioning as advocates. And that work is so tender and sensitive that we don't do it necessarily ourselves, but we support specialist professionals who know how to support women and children in those various things. So so those are the ways that we're involved in the community, and then beyond that, there's church planting, and so and church multiplication. multiplication, which is one of the questions you wanted me to talk about.
Yeah, that's
I feel it's important.
Yeah. No, and I'm so glad you added the thing about the marriage course, because that is something you're bringing to the community. And often when I ask this question, like, yes, in the back of my head, it's somewhat it is a bit social justice-y, just because it's, to me, it's something that's in the Bible. And when I see churches not doing stuff, that's where I'm like, okay, what's up though? Because there was a huge emphasis in the scripture on this, but beyond that, there's so much stuff beyond that. So when churches are only about the social justice piece, I'm like, no, we're missing stuff, other opportunities too. So thank you for bringing those up.
My thinking on that is, if you have an opportunity to give somebody $5 who needs it to go buy their next meal, but you don't have the opportunity to give them, to talk about Jesus, you still give them the $5.
Yeah.
So I think the misnomer in it is that there's been a huge divide between the two, where there's social justice and helping people, so give somebody bread to fill their belly, and then there's this other side where it says, no, you're not helping anybody unless you give them the bread of life.
Yeah.
And so I tend to say, well, I don't actually think it's a pendulum. I don't actually think it's a spectrum. I think that these things are wrapped up within each other. And so Jesus, when he feeds the 5,000 people, what does he do? First of all, he was on his way to, I think his cousin John just had his head cut off, and he finds a way to stop. He finds time to stop and have compassion on them. Yeah. So I think that justice in serving other people starts with getting over yourself and your own agenda and saying, I'm going to meet the needs of the people right in front of me. And it says he healed their sick. And he would have been preaching and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, because that's what he did everywhere he went. So those things are wrapped up. Yeah. And then he works this incredible miracle to feed people to the point where there's leftovers, which I think tells us that, the type of compassion we have when we serve people to meet justice issues or whatever it is should be so far and beyond what we even thought was possible, to the extreme. And God actually multiplied all that, those bread and fish, right? So as we're generous, God does incredible things and works miracles in all of that. So I would just like to see the divide broken down, where, people on one side who say, well, I'm going to preach, and if they listen to me, then I'll give them the food. I think you need to knock that off. And then if you're just giving people food, you need to always be trying to find an opportunity where you can do that. Don't force it. Don't make it their price of admission is to listen to get the food. Like, if all you can do is give somebody that without even an explanation, you do that, because that's the Christ-like thing to do. So
I'm very much with you. I don't think it needs to be. I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and.
Yeah, they're together. Yeah.
Yeah. You touched on it before we got sidetracked. Let's talk about church planting, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when we talk about it here, we don't necessarily talk about church planting specifically. We talk about church multiplication.
Okay.
And so there's a whole lot of ways you can talk about this. Church planting typically is when a lead planter, takes a team and goes into an area and starts from scratch to build a church.
Right.
To begin building a church. And so that's not exactly what we're doing. That is what happened when Upper Room was planted 12 years ago. Rexdale Alliance down in Etobicoke said we were going to send a group of people to Vaughan, because that's a growing it's a growing city north of where we are in the city. And so they went, parachuted in, kind of started to do it where there was no existing ministry. What we're doing is a little different from that, in that we're not opposed to that. That might happen down the road, but what we're trying to do right now is we're just looking at where our congregation lives. And so when we look at a map and we put little pins on Google Maps all over the place, we see that we have a collection of people that are east of Vaughan in a place called King City. So what that does is it puts on our radar, we've got 40 or 50 people driving from King City into Vaughan. It's about a 15 or 20 minute drive. Because there's a huge collection of people there already, it actually makes sense to start thinking about that's where our next site might be.
Right.
Someone who's a part of a church might be willing to drive 15 or 20 minutes to church on a Sunday, but your neighbor who doesn't know Jesus or want anything to do with him is very unlikely to drive 20 minutes. So if you could have an opportunity or an expression of your church mission, vision, values in your neighborhood, it's more likely you'll be able to invite your friends' kids and invite your friends, or you can invite their teenager to youth group or something when it's taking place 3 or 4 minutes down the road in a location that's already familiar to them. So more in that kind of line of thinking at the moment. That being said, we're in an interesting situation with this church in Bolton. Bolton is about 25 minutes northwest of Vaughan, or 20 minutes northwest of Vaughan. Traffic is horrendous here, so it depends on the day. Highway 7 by the 400 is really bad. And so anyways, to go... I'm actually looking at my window right now in the direction of Bolton. Chris can see this on the video. What's happened there is there's an existing Christian and Missionary Alliance church. They've been around for about 25 years. And the past couple of years, they just went through a number of challenges up until the point where their lead pastor resigned in the fall of 2017. And so we were already set up to come in and do a partnership where we were going to say, we're going to support the lead pastor as it stands by providing the preaching and some other infrastructure kinds of things there. Now, he resigned from his position. He's no longer in the scene. But we decided, the elders of Bolton Alliance decided, along with Upper Room, to continue in this partnership. And so what that looks like is VJ, Upper Room's lead pastor, preaches in Vaughan. I preach in Bolton. And then the next Sunday, we switch and preach the exact same message to the other congregation. And so we've been giving home group leadership. I meet with their elders on a regular basis. We have a lead team of volunteers that I interact with, oversee the finances, and basically help the youth volunteers do what they're doing. And so basically instilling some of the structure and strategy and vision of Upper Room, some of the care and resources that we have into the church in Bolton. And so now Bolton Alliance is actually working towards having a vote in April about whether or not they will actually totally amalgamate and totally become part of Upper Room Church, which means they would, their elders board would dissolve as a charity. They would dissolve. All of their members would go through a process of becoming a members of Upper Room, but it would remain Upper Room Bolton, and then we'd have Upper Room Vaughan and Upper Room King and Upper Room Newmarket and Upper Room Scarborough, Upper Room Hamilton, or wherever we go. Just start naming all the places off. So that's kind of more the line of where we are. So we've got this idea where we've got congregants in certain places that we want to reach their friends, family, they're people that don't know Jesus, but then there are also a number of churches in the GTA that are struggling and having a harder time, and we're not opposed to coming alongside them and saying, hey, for the sake of the kingdom, it's not about our castle, it's not about our name, we're not trying to franchise, it's just about reaching people with for the sake of Jesus. And so so that's part of it. Underneath that lies, our motivation for that lies in our belief is that we think that churches are the strongest form of evangelism, and that is because if a church is doing holistic ministry where they're reaching kids, youth, adults, seniors, where they're doing a variety of programs and meeting a bunch of needs, that just creates a whole bunch of on-ramps or opportunities for people to hear about Jesus in the mix of all that. And so, yes, we take care of their felt needs, but as we're taking care of their felt needs, they're hearing about Jesus, who meets all of our needs and makes us a whole person. And so that's part of why we want to just expand to as many cities as we can. We also believe underneath all this is that churches are for the salvation of souls, and they're for the redemption of cities. And so churches go and they proclaim the good news, and people come to know Jesus, and their lives are transformed. And so what that means is, someone who comes in and gets their life transformed by Jesus becomes a better citizen, because now they're using their money and they're using their money to care for the needs in their city. They're being sacrificial with that. They're using their time and being sacrificial with that. And so that has a direct impact on the cities as well. And so there's a church out west that I'm connected to, and they're looking at purchasing a plot of land, and so they were at City Hall, and zoning for that plot of land would have to be changed to a place of worship. And while they're in there making their case, like an impossible thing really, because they could have put houses there or a business and made tons of money on the taxes that they would get. If you put a church, it's not going to work out quite the same. And as they were giving the spiel, it goes to an open mic for people in the community to talk about what they feel about this thing happening, and person after person, one person says, I know of that church, they helped my brother get off drugs, or I know that church, their youth pastor talked my kid into staying in school, I know that church, my kids went to their day camp and loved it. And so it has, just by being present, there's in doing effective ministry, there's a direct impact on the community at large. Now, whether or not all those people, the brother who was saved from got off drugs, whether or not he was saved by Jesus, I don't know how that story continues, but the fact is that guy being off drugs and living a more healthy life is still a win for the church. So that that's kind of some of our motivation for all that, and this is really what I'm part of most of my thinking that I get to do during the week, which is like, man, this is like the greatest thing ever. Do I know what I'm I'm doing? Usually not. Usually I don't have a clue, which is what makes it so exciting.
Yeah. No, and just that little bit there where it's church being present in the community and having an impact is so important. I remember a couple of years ago when I was still at Calvary, it was, I think, a year or two after you left, the church was applying for a grant for money for the summer day camp, which we'll see how that goes this year with the new laws and everything, but that's a side convo. They had reached out to a local politician, Craig Stevens. He was the NDP member in that riding. And I've talked to people in the church who are like, oh, the NDP, they're so far left, I hate the church, you never vote, blah, 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 blah. And he was like, give them more. I think he gave Calvary double what they were appealing for, because he's like, no, you guys do so much for the community. You got the day camp, you got the drop-in, you've got this, and this. You guys do so much. So, I love hearing that the church is actually like impacting the community. So that story there, and I agree with you. That's my own way of saying, like, I get where you're coming from, and I agree. How do you determine what to preach about every week, man?
We use basically it's like a magic 8-ball, and we just shake it up every week and whatever. No, that's not true. That's a terrible joke. VJ, our lead pastor, and I, we work through. We basically have everything from now until Christmas of this year.
Wow.
Sorted out. We've got all of our series picked out, and so we take more of a topical approach to our preaching style. And so, we still go to. It's all rooted in Scripture. We just take the topic and we, exegete the culture. We, try to contextualize things, understand what's happening in our world, and then help people see that, man, this is directly. The Bible has always spoken about this, so it's nothing new.
Yeah.
For example, this past weekend I preached on, healthy media consumption and the idea of how that's directly connected to our holiness. And I went to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, where he says this is the will of God, your sanctification, and if you're going to be a holy person, then abstain from sexual immorality, don't take advantage of other people, and don't lust for people, power, or things. So all the things that we have and the problems we have in this world, there's the topic, and it was already talked about 2,000 years ago. So that's kind of the approach we take.
Nice.
Plan these things out. We typically do 8-week-long sermon series, and then we do a 2 or 3 week or 1 month little smaller series in the middle, and then back to a longer one. And so that's the habit that we're in. We, for example, in the fall, we did a series on, it was a topical series, seemingly topical series called Foreigners. Basically the idea being, what does it mean to live a life in this world, to be a Christian living in this world where we feel like we're a foreigner, like things are not the way they're supposed to be. But what it really was a chapter by chapter walkthrough of the book of Daniel. So the idea of a modern day Babylon and stuff. So that's kind of the way we come at it. I mentioned already, we're talking to people who are skeptical, people who've been de-churched, people who have a lot of preconceived notions about what the church is, for better or worse, and we just try to be authentic and real and talking about that. So we plan all these things out. We assign our topics, and we assign our sermon scriptural texts, and then we preach to each other every Thursday. So on Thursday, if I'm preaching that Sunday, the new one, because we do this every other week thing. Other church. And let me tell you, the first couple of months of figuring this out was like, we didn't know where we were. We thought we were going to drive to the wrong building. But now what we do is, if, for example, if I'm preaching this Sunday a new one, I will have preached on Thursday to our discipleship pastor and to our lead pastor, and they basically have a free-for-all to kind of cut it up and critique it and say, well, what about this idea? And maybe we want to kind of get rid of that stuff and elevate this other idea. And then, we take the rest of Thursday afternoon and Friday morning on our own to finish it up. And basically it hits the printer Friday at noon, and that's when I start, marking it up and memorizing it. So by Sunday, I've already gone through it out loud probably 4 or 5 times. Practicing it, and I've got it about 80% probably memorized, with the exception of, quotes and certain more lengthy things I've got to refer back to. So that's kind of how we do it. And then we also bring in a creative team. So around Easter, for example, we had a creative team meeting about a month ago, or 2 months ago from when this might go live. Anyways, January. Where we just talk through ideas and themes, and we pray and we say, God, what is it that you have for our church? Where should we be emphasizing? Is there a particular text or a concept that you want us to focus on? And then we allow that team to speak into the process and say, well, what if you guys did a tag team teaching? So instead of just one of you preaching, you guys did 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, or 5, 5, 5, and then a conversation. And so they just speak into that, and that helps us get a broader understanding of what our church, where our church is at. So after Easter, we're doing a series on it's called Being Human, and it's basically about what does it mean to be a man, what does it mean to be a woman, what is God's design for marriage, and what about this sex and gender conversation, gender fluidity. And so as we get ready to talk about that, we're having little kind of chats with different people in our congregation just to get a sense of where we're all at.
Yeah.
So talking about what's relevant, we're not allowing the congregation to dictate what we speak about, because we're not just trying to itch ears or scratch itchy ears, but rather what we're doing is we're saying, here's what we kind of see as being major issues in our culture, and so just to make sure that we're kind of on the right track. And then God is good and all of that, and He works, and He's led us to be relevant as long as I've been around anyway. So to be honest with you, as long as you're talking about Jesus and the good news of hope for the world, you're always relevant, because unfortunately our world is so broken. There's always a need for hope.
Yeah.
As long as you can land there, you're always relevant in a sense.
That's a crazy awesome approach.
I love it. I had to get over myself, man. And I think that, to be honest with you, this would be very challenging for a lot of preachers, because so many preachers are doing such a wide variety of things that they don't even have the time in the week to dedicate as much as they would like to. That's not a criticism. That's just a reality of how ministry is.
Yeah.
But then the other thing is that they don't always have someone that will listen to them, or they're concerned, and so it goes live on Sunday morning or Sunday night or Wednesday afternoon, whenever you preach to your congregation, your church congregation, and you might get a few good job pastor punches in the shoulder. You might have a handful of people who say, "Yeah, you really spoke to me today, or God really spoke to me." That's awesome. I love that. You might get a few emails that say, "You're a clown. You shouldn't ever, you were all wrong about that," and blah blah blah. So there's almost a defense mechanism, because it's like, well, this is the first time anyone's hearing it out loud, and once it's said, it's said.
Yeah.
What happens here is like, well, no, when I go in on Thursday afternoons, they're gonna graciously tear it apart, and it's not because they think I'm bad.
Yeah.
It's because we want to make it better, and we want a communal discernment process.
Yeah.
We want a communal discernment process to ensure that it's not just one voice that speaks in, I'm the Lord your God from Sinai speaking, blah 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 blah. It's nothing like that. It's like, we've all worked on this together, and we've sensed the general unity in what we believe God is asking us to do. So it's been awesome. I had to get over myself, throw my ego out, or at least misplace it for a while. I don't know where I put that, but I'm sure I'll find it eventually.
Ego has an interesting way of doing that, yeah. And I had a similar thing when I was at youth center, just because I had never done the preaching aspect. So Gary was like,
right,
you got to run it by me, you got to run it through me, which for me in the end, I love doing that, just because on certain weeks where I'm like, all right, Gary, we're going to be talking about homosexuality this week, I'm like, all right, when I hear something from the church kids' parents on Sundays, which guaranteed I will, and I did, I'm like, I've got people to point to be like,
absolutely,
look, it wasn't just on the fly seat of my pants kind of thing, like something I worked on, something Gary went through, something email from the missions committee was here and there and gave me the thumbs up on, like,
absolutely, yeah.
And then so it's not one voice, and it's when I, like, during the second year, I was all like, I want the volunteers to start preaching more, because I don't want it to be the Chris show. It was, guys, send it to me. Send it to Gary, of course, but send it to me as well. I'd like to read through it and get the idea. And then also it's like, let's work on this together.
Yeah.
So then I get that entirely, and I love that. I love that approach. This one's always a fun one. Are there any resources, pastors, authors, theologians, that you learn from that you'd like to recommend people to check out?
Yes, there are. Next question? No, you want me to tell you what? I'll just tell you what kind of stuff I read. There's so much good stuff. There's just so much good stuff out there. There's a lot of junk too, but even the bad stuff still will help you, frame your own position. So
it can be a roadmap for what not to do.
I mean, if we're talking about like preachers and stuff, the guys that I tend to follow along are Mark Clark, who's a guy from a church, village church in BC. I listen to Tim Keller, not on a weekly basis, but semi-regularly. I think I have all of Tim Keller's book. He's been actually really helpful in helping me understand what it means to, what contextualization is. Tim Keller will talk about contextualizing the gospel is giving the Bible's answers to the questions that the culture is asking.
Yeah.
And so that's helped us in our preaching model as well. There's a guy named Joe Thorne. He's from a church in St. Charles, Illinois. And I listen to him on a podcast where he just talks about theology and stuff, but I listen to his preaching as well. For 5.5 years, I sat under the preaching of Charles Price at People's Church, and so I often go back and reference his sermons. And then our lead pastor, Vijay Krishnan, is a fantastic communicator, not just because he speaks well, but God has given him an incredible mind to just have a great perspective, to see things from such a different way. We might all look at something, this way, and they'll say, yeah, but what about this? And look at it from the total other side, and that just gives you such a depth of clarity.
Yeah.
So I appreciate him. By means of theologians, I mean, I don't know. Everyone's a theologian, I guess, in a sense. If you have one thought about God, even that, if God doesn't exist, that's a theological thought, I guess. Somebody said once. So, I don't know. Right now, like if you're talking about old school people, I read John Wesley often. I read his sermons. I read some of his thinking. And I like him. I basically bought a box set with everything he ever wrote, and I'm slowly making my way through that. I also like reading Charles Spurgeon stuff.
Spurgeon, yes.
Spurgeon and Wesley, like, they would have very robust conversations with each other, if not arguments, just over the differences in their theology. But both of them have been influential for me. And then in terms of other stuff, there's Ed Stetzer, in terms of missiology and thinking through church planting and revitalizing churches and that kind of stuff. Ed Stetzer and Daniel I.M. Are both amazing thinkers, and so I follow their podcast called The New Churches Podcast. This book, which is called Multi-Church, which I'll show you, Chris. Nobody else can see that, but Multi-Church, exploring the future of multi-site, just talking about,
nice.
Why should we go to multiple church expressions and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's what I find. Logos Bible software is always open on my computer. I use that for everything.
Yeah.
Even the free stuff is good, but if you have some money to invest in that, worthwhile. And I'm just looking around my office now. There's a lot of other ones, but those are the ones I tend to reference. In terms of commentaries on a weekly basis, I use Matthew Henry, I use the New Testament Preacher's Commentary, and then I have a bunch of like one-off pulpit series books for depending on what passage I'm using.
Nice.
But I typically reference Matthew Henry, who's again another old guy, Presbyterian dude, on a regular basis. So
awesome. Well, I'll be honest. One of the reasons I love this question, I ask everybody this question, is you get a different answer. Like, some you'll run into, but then also you do get a different answer. So then, for me, I might recommend people like, I don't agree with everything he says, but I still like J-Pipes. I recommend Chandler. I recommend Francis Chan. But then you get stuff about church planting. You get Timothy Keller. You get all these guys. So it's great.
My recommendation would be like read something old and read something new. I typically have like 5 books going all at once.
Wow.
And they're not all theology. I read a lot of leadership stuff too. So just thinking out of the look of my shelf, Simon Sinek he has this whole start with why, find your why. You can't actually do anything of value in this life until you know why you're doing what you're doing. And so those are secular writers, but hugely beneficial for church leaders to be thinking. I think one of the problems we have in churches is that we're not innovative enough. We're not pursuing these ideas enough. We get trapped in all this other busy church work stuff. But so that's been helpful. So you read something that was written like last year or this year, and then read something that was 200 years ago, especially if you're preaching. Like, we're part of an incredibly old tradition. So to be exposed to a variety of things, of what people have thought about our faith for generations, for literally hundreds and thousands of years, is just a great opportunity we have. So to not do that is a big miss.
Yeah.
To think of everything that was written in the last 10 years as the clearest stuff we have on theology, it's not necessarily true. Just as much as I can't go to John Wesley and find every answer either, because he wouldn't be able to exegete our culture today because you didn't live in it. So you need a mix of that stuff.
Yeah. So I want to be respectful of your time because I know you got to go in a couple minutes. So I'm going to jump down to 2 questions for you. Back in November, you were part of a youth conference at Tyndale, which is awesome. Like I've seen you do stuff at Today's Teens when I was taking youth there, and you got to be you were a panel, not a panel speaker, but you got to do stuff there. What was it like being at the youth conference in Tyndale, and how did the talk go?
Yeah, I think they called it the Tyndale Youth Ministry Leadership Conference or something like that. It had some really long, convoluted name. But it was the first conference of its type that they had held that was only attended by people who were serving in youth ministry. That's it.
Wow.
So different than other conferences where there might be kids and leaders there as well, or just for paid staff or stuff just for volunteers. This was just for them. And so in my workshop was all youth pastors in paid or voluntary positions, and I was invited to talk about ministering to LGBTQ plus teens. And so one thing that I loved about that opportunity, I mean, any opportunity to talk about Jesus is amazing, but one thing I liked about this was I was able to really go specifically focused onto, okay, youth pastors working with teenagers and their parents, here's exactly what we can talk about. It was really fine-tuned.
Nice.
So I think that's what helped it be more practical across all the various workshops that they held.
Yeah.
The other thing I learned, or what was amazing, was that all of the questions, essentially I did an hour and a half of Q&A. I had some content, but I just went to Q&A because I sensed that was the desire in the room, and I kind of referred back to the content I had prepared, was that nobody asked a hypothetical question. Every question that was asked was, this is a real situation I'm in right now with this teenager who is identifying as whatever. Mm-hmm. And so that was just so telling to me that we're in a day where it's no, like growing up for me, when I was a kid, I don't think I actually knew a gay person.
Yeah.
We had, an estranged family member that was in a relationship, but he wasn't often talked about. And that was just the reality of our family, unfortunately, because, culturally didn't know how to deal with it. Religiously, my parents weren't sure what they believed about it and all that kind of stuff. And so now we live in a day where it's not uncommon. And it's everywhere. We all know somebody, a family member, a close friend, and so that was encouraging to me just in terms of the relevancy of the conference, that it wasn't let's just talk about theology and big ideas and stuff that might be, nice to talk about. It was like, no, this is a real issue, and like, please help me because I'm actually having coffee with this student on Tuesday. Can you help me? Like, what do I say when I sit down? Give me 5 things. So I was really encouraged by that. And I mean, a good friend of mine, his wife was part of putting it all together, so I was just super proud of Rebecca and all the work that she did too. It was really great, a really great day.
That's awesome, man, and that's I got to pick your brain more about that at another time.
Sure, yeah.
All right, so final question: what would you say to someone who is thinking about pursuing a vocational career in ministry, like be it as a youth pastor or more along the lines of like teaching pastor or any of the stuff you've done, because you've had a lot of hats, a lot of ministry hats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think a question we should ask is, why do you want to do it, or why are you sensing this, or why do you want to do it? Why? What's your primary motivation?
Yeah.
It goes like, my conviction is that every person, every Christian at the very least, should be in a discipleship relationship with somebody who's a little bit older than them, who's saying, follow me as I follow Jesus. And that person should have freedom to speak into your life and say, hey, here's an area where I think you are just so strong and so smart, and like, this is your wheelhouse, you should be pursuing there. Or, you know what, hey, I actually don't think that's the direction you should be going. And we all need to be in that.
Yeah.
Someone has like a holistic access to our lives to ask us whatever they want about us. So I think that's probably where we should start. So I mean, like, if you're just trying to, and what's your why about getting into ministry? Somebody else can help you figure out what that why is. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If you want to get in because you have something to say and you just want to preach, my question would be like, well, do you have something to say? And if you do, how do you know?
Yeah.
If you're the only person that thinks you have something to say, so for example, I'm actually interacting with a young guy right now. He's 17, he's about to graduate high school, and he feels it's God's call in his life to be a preacher, and so I'm mentoring and discipling him a little bit. And the conversation within a couple of weeks went to, so can you help me get speaking gigs? And I said, no, I won't help you get speaking gigs, because I don't actually believe that's what preaching the gospel is about. If you are actually called to be a preacher, you will find yourself preaching all the time. And you don't just preach when you have a big crowd or in a church or at a formal event. You find yourself preaching to yourself. You find, kind of working through the ideas that you have. You find yourself talking to friends about theology and about ideas and culture and this stuff. You are sharing your faith with your friends at school or on your hockey team or whatever else. And so I have seen that there's this idea of young guns wanting a platform, and it's like, well, do you deserve that platform? Like, have you earned that platform? Now listen to me, okay? I want to be really careful with what I'm saying. One of the reasons I'm saying this so plainly and so boldly is because I went through a couple of years where I did want to be the main speaker. I thought everybody was a dummy and I could just do it right, and God broke me over that. Yeah. He really brought me to my knees. That I get to be in this position right now is unbelievably humbling. Mm-hmm. And if for some reason it stopped today, I would say, God, thank you for the opportunity I had for 5 months to be in this position. I wouldn't say something's wrong with my church or blah, 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 blah. It would be, thank you for this. So I think that, my story has been, I've always been invited into things. I've never presented myself and said, hey, I'm available, or, marketed myself really. And some people do that and it works for them, whatever. But what I'm saying is I think that if it's really a calling, then you're going to find yourself doing it all the time already before it becomes even a vocation. So if you want to get in youth ministry, like my question is, are you already serving as a volunteer in youth ministry? If you're at school trying to get a degree in youth ministry, but you have never served, like that's not a good idea. I don't think so. I think that it should be something you're already doing. If you think that if you have a calling to doing street outreach, it's not you're only going to do that when you get the job that pays you to do it. You're already doing that thing, and then the opportunity comes for it to become. So that would be that. Figure out your why. What's your true motivation? I would say that's one thing. And then really, it's like, do it. Go ahead and do it. Yeah. Do it without getting paid. Like the Apostle Paul gives us a perfect picture of this, because he says plainly, I know what it's like to have lots, to have money, to have bread in my bag, to have clothes on my back. I also know what it's like to have absolutely nothing, where I'm running around like naked and trying to survive for my life because I've had everything taken away from me. And at the end of that, still worth it. Yeah. So go and do it. And if you're not being paid to do it, still do it. And if you do find yourself getting paid to do it, keep doing it. Yeah. If you're only doing it for the money, go find any other job that's going to pay you with more money. Yeah, exactly. You don't get into ministry for the money. No, you do not do that, for sure. You get into ministry because there's a burning inside your life. You don't know what else you could possibly do with yourself other than this. Yeah. And so I often think, what other job could I do? I don't know. I don't have schooling, so I don't think I can go get a real job. Sorry, not a real job. I don't think I can get a professional job. No, but I could get a real job doing all sorts of other things. And it's like, well, what would I do? What could I do? And I even know that if I went and was working at a golf shop, like a dream of mine is to work at a golf shop and clean golf carts and then get free golf one day a week or something like that. It's not a big dream. It's probably attainable. But I know that if I did that, I would still be miserable. Yeah. It wouldn't be fulfilling to me. So is proclaiming the good news of Jesus fulfilling to you? If all you could ever do is just talk about Jesus, is that enough for you? Or do you need something more? Do you have enough of an obsession with the way that Jesus has transformed your life to spend all of your time doing that already? Is there a chance that you would get kicked out of your school program for talking about Jesus because you love talking about him so much that you're willing to do it no matter the risk? Is it possible that you're getting brought into the HR department at work because you keep trying to pray with your coworkers because you're just so obsessed with Jesus? If you're answering yes to some of those questions, then maybe you're on the direction towards ministry, because vocational ministry, because you're already doing it right now. But don't just think of it as a profession that's to get into. There's so much more that I believe God does in us beforehand. So
thank you so much for sharing that with me, and I agree wholeheartedly. We skipped questions because I know you gotta go, so we're gonna get you back on, man.
Sure, I would love that. Yeah,
we gotta do this again. It was a blast. I know you're running late, so Dave, thank you so much for taking the time. I can't wait to see you in a couple weeks. We'll be posting the link to the Upper Room. So, listeners, if you want to check out Dave's sermons, I highly encourage it. He is actually one of my favorite pastors. On the website itself, I've got my go-to pastors, and I've said it's like Francis Chan, it's Platt, it's Chandler, and at points still Driscoll. But then locally, it's people at my own church, Steve and Dave. Dave's a guy I've got to track, and the Lord uses him to reach people. So I highly encourage you to seek out Dave's sermons and VJ's. I've also listened to and enjoyed thoroughly as well. So definitely check him out. Check out the Upper Room. Dave, thank you so much again for joining us, man.
Thanks, brother. Love you, man. Love what you're doing with One Cross Radio. It's a good thing, so keep it going.
Thank you so much, and I will, and we will have you back on. Listener, thanks for listening. Share if you can. Have a wonderful day, and God bless, my friends. Take care.